Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be a Game Week 32 free hit guide. I'll be setting off the template that I have in mind ahead of the Liverpool versus Leeds game, but of course keep in mind that if there are any injuries in that game, or if anything major happens that we might not have anticipated by the time this video has been dropped, do look out for that because that could change our draft. If we quickly look towards the clean sheet odds this week, I feel like that would help inform the draft structure that we'd like to incorporate. And my suggestion is going to be a 3-4-3 formation. The reason why I feel like that is appropriate is because if you look at the clean sheet odds, we can clearly see that Arsenal and Liverpool are dominant in the clean sheet odds. They have what a team like City or Newcastle would usually have when they have a very, very favorable fixture. And the reality is Arsenal and Liverpool are playing two of some of the worst teams in the league, particularly from an attacking point of view as well, as of late. You could see that Man United quite easily got the clean sheet versus Nottingham Forest, and I'm anticipating much of the same for both Arsenal and Liverpool. Arsenal, ironically, have actually been a worse team at getting clean sheets at home, so they are playing at home. But of course, I feel like clean sheets doesn't always tell the true picture of how a season went. But Arsenal right now are better in terms of getting clean sheets away. Liverpool have, however, been fantastic at home all season long. And we know that from looking at some of the historic results like the Man United 7-0 victory and so on and so forth. So from this template, I would actually say that Arsenal defenders might make sense, but I'd only really stretch that towards getting one defender here at maximum. And the reason why is because the Arsenal attackers are just that much more tempting. Whereas if you move over towards Liverpool, one of the issues, of course, is going to be how you can actually build a reasonable team that you can expect will start the game and do well for you. So I would actually say that Trent and Robertson and even Van Dijk, these options there make more sense in terms of banking on such a great clean sheet probability whilst also not having to deal with, let's say, the threat of starts or even mid-game rotation. Because now with Luis Diaz back, you could see someone like Darwin or Gakpo suffer when it comes to how much they're actually going to be involved in that game. Whereas Salah, I'd say, is still probably going to be a constant of 90 minutes. As far as Crystal Palace, they actually have the third highest clean sheet odds this week. And the reason why I've restricted showing clean sheet odds to these four teams is because they're the top four, but also because I really feel like with the 3-4-3 template, there's no reason to pick defenders outside of these teams. You could obviously look towards a recently informed Aston Villa, but they do have a very tough match versus Brentford. And as far as teams like West Ham, who are also facing a Bournemouth who are playing at home, I just feel like that is not a fixture where I'd like to go for a defender. There's just not enough upside there, in my opinion. And so Crystal Palace becomes an exciting option because you have the option to go for a cheap goalkeeper like Sam Johnstone. And with Newcastle, we have someone like Trippier, where even though the clean sheet odds are particularly low, and he's going to be facing someone like a Kane and a Son, the benefit, of course, is that Newcastle are playing from home. They've had fantastic defensive statistics all season, and particularly in the most important one, which is actually getting those clean sheets. So expected goals conceded, they are second across the league this season, but in terms of clean sheets, they've been fantastic. And Newcastle versus Spurs is going to be a tough match, but I still think that this is a great opportunity to own Trippier because Spurs have been a pretty poor defense, and we know that part of the reason why Aston Villa did so well versus Newcastle was they were stopping a lot of the opportunities for Trippier to do well, such as the set pieces and the corner kicks. And I don't really think that the Spurs team is actually built to stop them in the way that Aston Villa did. So I would say Trent and Robertson, these are great attacking upside options. Trippier equally is. And with Arsenal, the issue I suppose is that the Arsenal midfielders and forwards provide so much more in the attacking edge, even though we've seen some really nice mini hauls, I guess, from Ben White as of late, where I would say their defenders aren't so appetizing compared to a Trippier or a Robertson or a Trent. And for that reason, we just go quickly looking at the only, I would say, viable Liverpool and Arsenal options. I would say Trent, Robertson, and Salah are the priority three for me on the left-hand side, and then Darwin is someone that I'm not so interested in. The reason why I'm not so interested in Darwin is if you look at his expected minutes within the last few fixtures, you can clearly see it's very low. It's very random and sporadic as well. He could be playing something like 70 minutes, 75, but you can see something as low as in the 30s and the 20s, and that's not positive if you are someone who's looking to go for a super big Darwin haul versus Nottingham Forest. As far as the Arsenal players, I actually feel like you can actually go for any 3 out of 5 of these Arsenal players and profit. You could obviously go for Ben White as well, who's been doing tremendously well. You could also look at Another option, I guess you could plug in Ramsdale in your team, but it's not really that interesting. So I would say Gabriel is the most interesting from a defender, just because you're still looking at the man who a lot of the set pieces are built around, and it doesn't seem like Saliba is someone who's going to be nailed for this fixture. As far as Martinelli, Odegaard, and Saka, they've all been incredible, and it really just depends on the odd weeks. You could be choosing a week where all of them haul, you could be choosing a week where only one of them haul, and the same applies to Jesus. My issue with Jesus, and the reason why I won't be featuring him in my draft, is a similar situation to Darwin. Now, he obviously has a different situation where I think he gets to start every single match, so Jesus is already automatically better than Darwin. And the nice thing about Arsenal is that we will get hopefully some early leaks about what the lineup will be for Arsenal. So if there are any sudden changes, we should be able to adapt our drafts accordingly. So that's the nice situation there. Whereas with Darwin, you don't get that upside. But still, look at Jesus and specifically the West Ham game as well. We were expecting that Jesus' minutes would consistently go up, and that was the case for the last few weeks until once again we saw another early sub at the West Ham match. We saw a relatively early sub in Liverpool as well, and that's kind of making me think that Jesus might not be up to full match fitness, and that Arteta still believes that Martinelli, Odegaard, and Saka are the ones who deserve more minutes overall. Now, Jesus, of course, has done incredibly when it comes to getting points and also just scoring consistently since he's come back into the team. But I wouldn't say Martinelli, Odegaard, or Saka are unable to do that as well. They still have great underlying statistics. And even though Saka did miss the penalty, I still think he's going to be the penalty taker. Saka also notoriously has much better statistics playing from home, although I think that's a bit subjective and small sample size. But ultimately, Saka is someone that you still probably want to have in your team, even though he missed a penalty. It's the same logic as wanting to go for someone like a Mo Salah after he missed a penalty versus Bournemouth and also recently versus Arsenal. You're still probably going to look at him because a lot of the chances still fall towards him as one of Liverpool's leading players. So with Martinelli, Odegaard, and Saka, I feel like those are the options that you can look towards to prioritize in terms of minutes if you want to go and think about triple Arsenal attack. But Jesus, of course, is still, I would say, the outside shout, the fifth option for me. And Gabriel's very, very close to them all. It's for this reason my team will have a core of a back three and a back four that looks like this. And for me, Trippier makes sense because I would like to gamble on the upside of the Arsenal attack. I really can't decide for the life of me between the midfielders in terms of dropping someone from Martinelli and Odegaard and Saka. And I don't really want to go into Jesus because my thoughts in terms of Jesus and Martinelli is this. I feel like Trossard will come in at around 70, 75 minutes for one of the players. And it's more than likely going to be Jesus coming off the field. So I would prefer having someone like Martinelli, who's probably going to play, hopefully, another 85, 89-minute game, as opposed to Jesus, who's going to play 70 minutes. Now, of course, Jesus was in some lovely attacking positions in the last few matches, but I feel like Martinelli, Odegaard, Saka all equally have been, and they also get the advantage of getting clean sheet points and lucking out with, let's say, getting more points from just simply goals scored. So that's going to be why I'm going for the Arsenal midfielders. Salah is non-negotiable for me. He's the only Liverpool attacker that I really think is worth investing into, simply because he'll play something like 85 plus minutes. And as far as Trippier, this is the situation where I feel like a lot of the ownership of Kane this week will be people trying to hedge against the general population who already own Kane. But this is a terrible matchup for Kane. This is Newcastle away from home. One of the worst possible fixtures you can get independently as a striker. And it still makes sense for me to back Trippier in this situation, even though he is versus a very tough Son who looks somewhat rejuvenated. And then, of course, Kane, who actually was sort of playing, I guess, defensive mid, arguably, versus Bournemouth. And that's why I would like to bank on Trippier, because at the very least, we know that the Spurs team haven't been particularly good defending away from home. And you could look into someone like Trippier who would get the attacking edge. So he has that sort of double-edged sword that a lot of defenders this week don't. If we look back at a team like Crystal Palace, the reason why we're going into a player like Johnstone is so that we can back on a player who will probably get a clean sheet or has a high likelihood of doing that. Some of the other teams this week that you could pick, such as an Aston Villa, don't seem too tempting because there's a very high chance that they will concede. So there is not much of an attacking edge or a defensive edge there, whereas Trippier at least gives you a small little balance. And of course, he pales into comparison versus these Liverpool and Arsenal assets, but ultimately you can only have 6 of them. So therefore, I will have Trent and Robertson as part of this team alongside Salah, which I think is going to be nailed amongst the common population. But with Martinelli, Odegaard, and Saka, this is where you're going to make a few differences in terms of your free hit point ceiling, right? Jesus could be picked by some, Gabriel can be picked by some, and so on and so forth. As far as the actual differentials, though, I feel like our teams are all going to round out with a slightly different template. It's going to be between Eze and Maddison for that last midfield position if you are not going for a triple Arsenal mid setup, particularly if you are looking at Jesus. I think between Eze and Maddison, Maddison is still a slightly better pick, even though Eze is actually facing the worst opponent. So if you look at the away stats of how Everton have performed, I mean, they are close to the bottom of the league and they're 18th in expected goals conceded. Now, this includes, of course, multiple different tenures, the Lampard tenure, and Sean Dyche has really only come into the team lately. But the expected goals conceded stats for Everton haven't really improved too much. And ultimately, away from home, they're a much worse side. So this is a good week, of course, to invest into someone like Eze. And I haven't mentioned Olise or shown him here, but he could equally be a great option to pick. I just really feel like Crystal Palace is almost like Arsenal light, where you could have Jordan Ayew doing well, you could have Zaha coming back eventually and doing well, you could have Mateta and Edouard, who both are options, and then Eze and Olise can do well independently as they have in the previous two matches. It's too hard to pick for me, and I feel like Crystal Palace have probably been a bit fortunate in terms of actually scoring as many goals as they have in the last two games, the 7-2. But I still can't really put my finger on who to actually go for. So I would much rather go for Maddison if you really were tempted to, let's say, incorporate Jesus in your team and you were looking for a differential in the midfield. Maddison looked good versus what I would call Man City B in his little debut there when, let's say, John Stones and other key players were taken off the field and Man City really dropped the ball. So you could see that Leicester's expected goal stats versus Man City were really, really good and really promising for Maddison, who actually got good expected assists. But keep in mind, of course, the context of how that Man City team changed fundamentally. Players like Cole Palmer and Sergio Gomez, of course, were brought in. So that does change how good Maddison really was in that game. But I thought he had great and ample opportunities to shine. First of all, we know Maddison gives you the added bonus of being a set-piece threat, someone like James Ward-Prowse possesses. But at the same time, he's very, very good in open play as well, something that James Ward-Prowse isn't. And so Maddison seems like an interesting option just because he looked so good at the sort of tail end of that Man City game. But I feel like we might be overselling ourselves on someone like Maddison. As far as the forwards, though, the reason why this is so interesting is because 3 out of 4 of these forwards will probably, or 2 out of 3 at the very minimum, if you go for a Jesus or if you go for a Darwin, will be a part of your team. And why I've looked at the opponent expected goals conceded stat is because I feel like that's a good judgment for what the quality of opposition is. These are all players who recently have been informed. Someone like Isak has done tremendously well. He, keep in mind, of course, was rotated once in those fixtures, but that was during a midweek fixture. So Wilson came on and started ahead of Isak. Isak was still able to score, but that was when they had this midweek rotation. Outside of that midweek rotation, though, Isak has played very, very good minutes. He's played 86, he's played 90 minutes. So I really feel like this is a good week to bank on what Isak should be playing, which is something like 85 minutes plus. As far as Watkins, Toney, and Solanke, these are all the primary starting strikers for their teams. No questions asked, and there's no rotation threats available. They're all on penalties as well. With Isak, there's a question mark because if Callum Wilson comes on and Newcastle are, let's say, struggling to actually get a good result versus Tottenham, then Wilson could come on too. They could continue to play the two up top with Isak sort of playing left wing at times. And therefore, that could change maybe Isak's ability to get a penalty. But I do like the team when Isak starts, and I feel like Isak will start. And I also think that they will overwhelm Tottenham. So that's kind of my judgment call as to why I think Tottenham or going against Tottenham would make sense and going with Isak here. As far as Toney and Watkins, to me, that strikes as a both teams to score game. I feel like Aston Villa, of course, have been tremendous in getting clean sheets as of late. They're on a 5-win bounce. Brentford, on the other hand, have been on terrible form. I think losing 3 games in a row, also drawing 2 just before that. But Toney still has been very consistent in those games. You could look at the Newcastle game as a good example for how he should have really done better when it comes to FPL points. But Solanke as well has been blowing teams away. And if you look at a very, very small sample size, then his statistics look really good too. What is interesting, though, is West Ham have actually been a really, really good away defense. And that's the key, most alarming statistic for me here. West Ham are actually 3rd in the league, so actually just below 2 other teams in terms of Man City and Newcastle in getting expected goals conceded away. Sorry, not Newcastle, but actually Arsenal. And that's quite alarming because that is something that we probably wouldn't have expected. And Solanke getting to face what should be a tough West Ham side is interesting. Now, if the West Ham side that actually showed up in the first 15 minutes of the Arsenal game shows up again, of course, Solanke is going to have a field day. But I feel like that West Ham, of course, are looking for the bulk of their points through opposition such as Bournemouth, and it's going to be quite a tough game for Solanke to do well. As far as Tony Watkins, as I explained, I do think it's more of a BTTS type of game, and with Isak, that is sort of gambling on the upside that Isak will play 85 to 90 minutes, because I think he's an electric player and someone that I would absolutely love to slam into my team on a free hit. And the gambling odds do suggest that all of these players are great. I would say Eze and Solanke probably less preferred by gambling odds. So it actually leads me towards thinking that Tony, Isak, and Watkins is going to be my front line for this week. So rounding out my team selection, I'm going to have Tony, Isak, and Watkins. And captaincy, I would like to put it on Salah. I do think it's going to be a good game for him. I still think he's on penalties. And Saka, of course, the vice captaincy. I could swap ahead of the deadline, but I feel like at this moment in time, there's chances that we've actually seen this Liverpool be able to build at Anfield lately. I do think Salah is going to trump Saka. With Arsenal, I'm hoping that effectively these midfielders will share all the points, and then with Liverpool, I'm hoping that Salah gets the absolute bulk of it. So that's why Salah is going to get my captaincy, and that's going to be my Game Week 32 draft. But keep in mind, of course, that a lot of these options can be interesting, as you can see with the bench as well. Madison could be an option that you actually prefer over one of these strikers. You could think about Solanke as well. You could even go for a differential punt of Iheanacho that I haven't really mentioned, but I feel like he's not getting enough minutes to actually be worthwhile in a free hit, but he could be a crazy little punt. And I know a lot of people will be looking at someone like Alex Moreno, who's been incredible as of late. But that's sort of how I've chosen with my Game Week 32 free hit draft. Let me know what other players you guys are thinking of, and I will see you soon.